Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to episode 91 of the Cloudcast. Today we're coming to you live from the CloudStack Collaboration Conference again, here in Santa Clara, California. And today we have Chip Childers. Chip is VP, is that the correct title, of the Apache CloudStack project?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And we also have David Nalley. David is PMC, which is our project member. Correct?
Project Management Committee.
There you go. Member for Apache CloudStack as well. And we just wanted to talk a little bit today about the conference in general, what's it like herding the cats, what's going on with the product. And so with that, I just wanted to kind of open it up and just say, Chip, how did you get started in all of this? And how did you end up as ultimately the
one of them,
BMFIC?
Yeah, one of them involves being apparently too slow at figuring out how to avoid it. So
we counted on that, actually.
Yeah, I know. So I got involved in CloudStack because my employer was looking at which software they were going to select for cloud management. Mm-hmm. We'd written our own. We're actually still using our own software at this point, but we're going through a transformation, and so they effectively pay me to spend time on CloudStack, which is a lot of fun. Right?
Yep.
So so that's how I got involved. It's my first open source project, really of any significance, and so that's really been a lot of fun, right?
And so that background is very different from David's background.
Yeah,
a little bit.
David, and we'll go into that in a little bit more, but it's very interesting that you kind of went all in pretty much immediately with your first open source project.
Yeah. So it's certainly been a lot of fun, and it took an enormous amount of learning. I think the benefit we had. So CloudStack just, I guess, recently, a couple months ago, graduated from the incubator, at Apache. Becoming a top-level project similar to Hadoop and the Tomcat server, the Apache traffic server, all the major Apache projects. What I think was interesting was that honestly the incubation process for the project, I started very early on in the incubation, and it was actually pretty easy to learn along with everybody else, right? So actually, I would say if somebody's interested in a particular technical area and they see that a project has just been proposed into the incubator at Apache, but they haven't done open source before, it's actually a fantastic way to learn the ropes.
Sure, because you're kind of learning along with the project.
Yeah.
And David, you kind of have a longer history of it, being an original Cloud.com person and kind of coming in through to Citrix through the acquisition, but really your role is a member of the open source community on the Apache project.
Yeah. So
Citrix just happens to pay the bills.
Citrix pays me to work on Apache CloudStack and to make that my focus. And so I'm very fortunate that essentially they've pointed me in the direction of an open source project and said, go make it successful. So that's essentially my the goals that I have to work forward, and they are very nice in giving me a lot of leeway in making sure that happens, doing what I think is best for the project. So.
Yep. Now, let's step back for a second and just we'll talk about more about the project in a section, but in a little bit. But let's talk about the conference for a second. This is second CloudStack Collaboration Conference.
It is.
Second one sold out, which that's very good. But this is. I was talking to Kirk this morning. We recorded a podcast with Kirk this morning, and one of the big things he said though was it's nice that it is small, and it is a pretty tight community, and that it maybe hasn't gone just spiraling out of control. So tell me a little bit about the design of the conference, the content of the conference, and certainly running this really as an open source based conference.
I think that we have tried to model the conference much like the project. And I don't know if you got to see Chip's keynote yesterday.
Yep.
But we are very user driven, which means that there are a few vendors here, the people who want to sell you things. The vast majority of people who are here are people who are running clouds in production. And
there's no Solutions Expo booth to walk.
Right.
Yeah. And you'll notice that the talk schedule really isn't vendor after vendor pitching their product. We made a very conscious decision that sponsorship is a fantastic thing. The conference needs some money. Lightning talks during lunch are a great way to accommodate the pitch. Right?
Sure.
But our audience seems to be more interested in actually doing that type of either developer to user, user to user, and developer to developer collaboration. So that's what we've really been focused on making sure happened.
Though I think, in my mind's eye, looking at the schedule, I think the vast majority of that is user to user.
Yeah.
Most of the talks I have been sitting in have been, the occasional, we really want this feature, it's stopping us from doing awesome things, or we're doing awesome things and here are some of the things we're doing with it. Lessons learned from, kind of their deployment war stories. And at the same time, there's obviously developer to users talking about things that are coming in the next release, soliciting feedback for things that may be in a release in 4.3 or further out. So it's by its very nature. I mean, it is unlike a massive user piece of software like OpenOffice or even the Apache web server. There's a much smaller subset of folks who will actually operate a cloud. And I think we've done a good job of attracting those people to the conference. And so most of ours tend to be running CloudStack in production or getting pretty close to it.
Yep.
Now, a little bit about the project itself and the concept of Apache Software Foundation. Tell me a little bit what it's like. So David, you have, like you said earlier, the privilege of you're pretty much fully dedicated to this and the success of this and making this work. Chip, you're slightly different in the fact that you are dedicated to this, but you have a day job.
I do. However, I'm lucky enough.
Is it either or? Is it and? Tell me a little bit. How do you make that work?
Well,
right?
so if you look at a lot of the Apache projects, let's not talk about CloudStack specifically, right?
Sure.
Depending on the project, you're going to have a different blend of whether your contributors are dedicated full time, right? A lot of the projects that have a very large commercial ecosystem wrapped around them, there's a lot of dedicated engineers, working on that project. And then there are other projects that are truly, purely volunteer in the evening type of developer activity. CloudStack's nice because we actually have room for both. We have quite a few people that are paid to almost full time or full time to work on the project. Whether they're from Citrix or a lot of the user companies. What we're finding is a lot of operators are actually investing in engineering effort for the project that they use and care about, right? Because it helps them run their business better, and they have that opportunity. Others might not be able to dedicate one or more engineers, but they're still able to spend a little bit of time to maybe scratch their niche, fix this bug, add a minor feature. Personally, I'm able to dedicate as much as necessary because my employer wants that. But at the same time, yeah, certainly have a day job, right? So it's interesting. It's tricky to balance.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this morning there was a kind of State of the Feather keynote given by Doug. Oh gosh, it was Cutting.
Yeah.
So I really liked in a piece of that he kind of established what is Apache Software Foundation really like, and he used a public park analogy of you're setting up a public park and it's a public user space where all users can kind of come in and use the facilities and enjoy it and really collaborate and that's the goal of the Apache Software Foundation at a much higher level. It isn't necessarily trying to drive each of the projects to success, or that's each project's own goal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way Doug described it was, and I think he says it very well. Quality software is the emergent property of a quality community.
Yes.
And a quality community is best created in an environment that allows for individual expression and individual ownership over the project.
Sure.
So,
but then that also leads to one of the questions at the end was, what are some of the biggest challenges? And I thought he probably nailed it very well when he said a combination of because at the end of the day it is a volunteer effort, and it is user based, and it is a little bit of success of the project often is gated by that community, and also the ability of everyone to get along at scale. and it's
primarily through email-based communication.
Yes, and
right?
yes, exactly, and medium as impersonal as email at times. And so I'll ask the both of you, since you probably suffer through it in some way, shape, or form every single day, the highs and lows of exactly that. How accurate was Doug in that assessment? I monitor the lists. I just kind of lurk. I very rarely participate, but you guys are in the thick of it day in, day out, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, so we know that our community is, the CloudStack community is exceptionally active. I mean, if you can think about a measure of activity through lots of different metrics, but one of them that we look at is just total email volume, right? I mean, we're at thousands of communications back and forth every month, and that's a lot. It's a lot to keep up with.
Sure.
So I think that alone is a challenge for us to manage, right? So the community actually does things to help each other. So we've conventions, how you use good subject lines and all that, but that's obvious, right? Mm-hmm. We also do a weekly news that summarizes for those people that might just be observing to kind of tease out the salient bits. And also, just with a large enough community, you're able to just know that there are enough eyes on all of the discussions that most perspectives are going to be heard.
Okay. And David, from your perspective, because you tend to see, like you were saying earlier, you see pretty much every commit that goes through. Does it become overwhelming?
I actually had that conversation a little earlier this week with someone, and I said, between CloudStack, which is well more than 50% of my mail volume now, and some of the other mailing lists that I'm on, I've finally gotten to the point where I'm having to actually triage mail rather than read through all of my mail, and yes. It can be very overwhelming, and a lot of folks, especially folks who don't have as much time, can get overwhelmed pretty easily. You really do have to develop a mechanism for protecting yourself from the deluge. So whether that's a complex set of filters that pop the important things up to you, or just skimming through the mails. CloudStack is a very high throughput project at the moment, and lots of things going on, lots of excitement around it. So it is a little overwhelming, especially when folks first subscribe. They're not used to the deluge.
Yeah, and so to kind of tie in another kind of announcement that happened today, Zen Server went open source today to Linux Foundation. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about how is the way ASF, Apache Software Foundation, different in the way they handle a project versus, say, Linux Foundation or some of these other entities that are out there? What makes Apache unique in the way they operate projects?
So first, a couple of disclaimers, right? Chip and I are both members of the ASF, and while we've been involved in other organizations, so Chip's a member of some standards bodies, and I've been involved in some other open source organizations. I'm not party to any project that's currently at the Linux Foundation, right? So I think the first thing is that really differentiates the ASF is that folks are treated as individuals. You do not have status because of your employer or because of any past work that you've done somewhere else. Your contribution to a project is considered alone, and folks look at that, look at the quality, and so it's much more a project-based meritocracy. Mm-hmm. So you essentially cannot buy your way into a position of influence or power at the ASF. The second is that it is, as a software foundation, it is a public charity, which is in contrast to some of the other foundations out there. And so its stated goal is to produce software for the public good, available free of charge. And again, that's a little bit different in mindset, but one of the things that I really like about the ASF really is the incubator. And because they've essentially said there are core things that are necessary for you to have success at the ASF, and then there's a lot of other things that you get to decide yourself. And so communities get a wide range of input into how they govern themselves within a framework that protects the foundation legally, ensures that that the community is doing right by its consumers, the users of their software, etc.
Yep. Now, let's talk about CloudStack for a little bit. Latest release was 4.1.
Yes.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about 4.1 specifically. We'll get technical here for a little while, right? What are some of the big features that made it into 4.1, and what are some of the things the users are really asking for that solve problems there?
So the way I characterize the 4.1 release is that it had a set of internal architectural changes, which a user should not necessarily care about, but there's a reason for them, and I can talk about it. About 20 features of significance, a whole raft of improvements and bugs. Right? So you just kind of think of it as those buckets, right? It's the small stuff and then the big features and the architecture changes. The architectural changes are actually all about making it easier for new developers to join the project. Fundamentally, right? They're
trying to grow the project.
Well, it's allowing for better plug-in development so that vendor, and we'll see some of the fruits of this in our 4.2 release, which is coming up. But it's easier for a vendor to sponsor a developer to integrate with their technology on a number of fronts now, right? So 4.1 started us down a path of doing a better job of structuring the code in a way that helps grow the community, grow the integrations, and just make it more valuable for the users. The new features you'd asked, off the top of my head, CloudStack is operating at pretty large scale. There's value in smaller environments, but there's also value in the 40,000 host scale.
Sure.
And so we've now introduced a concept of regions, similar to AWS regions.
Okay.
The AWS regional model will allow us to do metadata synchronization between multiple clusters of management servers, and then that cluster of management servers could deal with a particular geography and all the zones inside of it. So that feature is an example of us actually heading down the path of increasing the scalability beyond what is already a fairly highly scalable software product. Give the large-scale operators some more capabilities on that front.
Okay.
We've added, there's, again, sticking with the operators for a second, at least the reasonable scale ones, there's very frequently a need to, within an operator's tooling environment, to have some type of telemetry about change that's occurring inside of the cloud environment. Okay. And one approach you can take to that is to funnel everybody through your own API proxy layer and kind of a whole bunch of complexity there. But we now have a capability to tie in basically to an event stream, right? Using AMQP, so you can listen and subscribe to events of interest, and maybe update a config database or a monitoring system or whatever. So you can respond to the self-service API-driven changes. So that was another big one.
One of the things that happened really was we started doing a lot more of focus on the EC2 API, and while we've always had that component, we've done a lot of work on increasing the fidelity to EC2's API standards, and also testing with the tools that people are using. So things like Bodo and some of the other EC2 API tools are actually getting tested. And we also adopted the EC2 Query API. We used to use the SOAP interface and are using Query interface now. So that's another large one. Plenty of things on the networking side. So 4.0, the first release that we produced once we were at the ASF, had support for Nicira's NVP software-defined network offering, but it only had Layer 2 support. So 4.1 included some improvements there and added Layer 3 support, and also added support for KVM. So previously that was a Zen server only functionality, but that support was added for KVM and getting a little higher up in the network layers. Also adding some support to do egress filtering. So a lot of folks said it's great that you're stopping traffic from going out. There's a lot of times we also want to stop traffic. We want to stop the egress, not just stop people from having the ability to come in. We want to be able to filter out the outbound as well, and so egress filtering for guest networks appeared in 4.1.
Now let me ask you guys this, because, and I did a live blog on it, so I'm completely throwing you a softball here. But Chip, in your keynote, you really mentioned a lot about momentum of the project, and one of the big things that I'm seeing is no matter with competition out there, they like to say, "Oh, we're this, and the whole comparison stats things in my mind is just an irrelevant where you're at in the market, right? But I really wanted to get your opinion of where is the momentum within the project? Is it something that is on the increase? Is it something that is moving at what you believe is an acceptable pace? And what's the overall quality of the project and the product?
That's a good question.
That's several questions.
It is several questions.
Yes.
I'm going to try to unwind that one a little bit. So let's first talk about how you measure a project and a community's health. Right? No single quantitative metric helps you. In aggregate, all they do is give you a general trend.
Yes.
In absolute terms, between different projects, they're meaningless. And a lot of times you have to look at the qualitative aspects of how the communication is working, what's the result of all of the things that you can measure quantitatively, right? So that's my basic premise for how I think about the question of, well, how's the community doing? And you can't compare communities effectively. I don't believe that anyone can do that effectively without being deeply involved in both. What you can do is you can measure outcomes. So we're on all of, and I said you can't use it in absolute terms, but in all of the quantitative measurements, whether we're talking about commit volume, whether we're talking about lines of code being committed, whether we're talking about new features, whether we're talking about measurements of collaboration, IRC traffic and email traffic, all of those are on the rise. Right? We continue to grow our committer base. Which is because we're growing our contributor base, which is because we're growing our user base. So we're very healthy and on a very steep slope for growth on basically everything we can measure.
Sure.
Now we're certainly growing rapidly, which means that the community has to continue to learn how to work with an ever bigger and bigger and bigger set of people that.
And you have more and more cats to herd.
I mean, so the nice thing is it's not my job to herd cats.
Yes, yeah, agreed.
It's a shared responsibility.
Yes.
Right? So those people that are interested in doing the cat herding are welcome to do the cat herding. And honestly, that's how you scale, right? So that's kind of a proven model that the ASF has. It's how the board operates, right? And it's a similar model that they apply towards projects where, I've got this title of VP. It means nothing, effectively. Except I need to submit a board report, and then there may be some legal issues that I'm responsible for. But the project management committee, of which I'm a member, is equally accountable for the success and growth of the community. Right. So that's one of the more important traits of.
So you bring up an interesting point. Is there the amount of so you've got committers, contributors, PMC members, as starting at contributors, as each of those levels grows, does the upstream grow? Does the amount of committers grow, and then does the amount of PMC board members grow or is it only that bottom level grows? Like, tell me a little bit about how it funnels up, right?
So I think that I don't know that there's necessarily a linear match between the two.
It's not a quota system.
Exactly.
It's time to add one more.
Right. But generally, more contributors will end up engendering more committers, and the natural processes. Of course, those people will have the potential to become PMC members, and essentially, we're looking for a little different. For a contributor, we're looking for the code they're contributing. We're looking at the quality of their conversations, and when someone on the PMC takes notice of that, we start discussing that person as being a committer and essentially having the rights to commit directly to the repository. When we have a committer who's been around for a while and is taking an active interest in not just developing for the project, but in the governance of the project and in the health of the community, we start having the same kind of conversations around making them a PMC member. And it certainly is a funnel. You essentially have to be a contributor to become a committer to become a PMC member. But it does as that contributor base grows. Certainly, our committer and PMC member lists grow as well.
Sure. Now, wanted to ask you guys. Okay, so 4.2 is coming out before too much longer. What are some of the big use cases, and what are you guys seeing as far as features that the users are really wanting in the product going forward? What are the areas, I don't want to say for improvement, but what are the areas for enhancement? And does it just make existing use cases more efficient, or is it about new use cases?
So why don't we talk about what some of the features for 4.2 are?
Sure.
With the premise that actually for most of these we can tie directly to users.
Okay.
Right? Whether they're the ones developing it or not, which in many cases they are.
Yes.
There's a pretty clear path, right, between user need, feature being built. I'll point to an example. Can we say the name of the company for Linux containers? Yeah, we can.
That's probably.
So Linux containers, control of Linux containers, replacing as another target for management is that was added by the guys at Guild, right?
Okay.
E-commerce shop. So they took stock of the orchestration software. They realized that they liked CloudStack. They independently realized that they wanted Linux containers, and they decided to tie the two together. So coming in 4.2, and in fact they're already running it in production, will include Linux container support. That's a great example. There's also a lot of work going in around the software-defined networking capabilities, right? So different plugins for different support. In some cases, like we mentioned the Nicira integration earlier. That was done by a company that wanted to use the two together again, right? Mm-hmm. But we also have vendors participating as well. So in 4.2, we've seen the support for Metacora's MitaNet. Big Switch has their capability now, and Stratosphere recently, the merge request just came in to bring that capability in.
Cool.
So that's another major focus area.
Yeah. I think kind of building on LXC, the entire concept of additional things you can manage has become a big deal. So we've added support for Cisco's virtual ASA 1000, so the ASA 1000V. We've also added support for distributed virtual switches in vSphere, and going a step further and just managing bare metal. So no longer do you have to have a container or a hypervisor. Mm-hmm. You can actually, using IPMI, manage bare metal, or if you're using UCS to manage UCS directly.
Yeah. And actually, it's interesting you bring that up, because I am seeing bare metal as a service, for lack of a better term, as a use case that's coming out more and more. So
yeah, it entirely depends on if operators can offer that, they puts them in a very strong position to be able to support a broader set of workloads. I really don't like that term, but I guess it's the one that everybody knows, right?
Right.
Because in all reality, in some cases, you need to take advantage of the full capabilities of a physical device. In some cases, a Linux container will certainly do, right? Mm-hmm. So it's depending on what you're trying to accomplish, a whole ton of RAM and a lot of processing power might be important for that particular container, or something small, lightweight. Right?
I do think that you talked about the entire use case idea and whether we're expanding that or not. And I don't think that we're necessarily expanding the use cases of things that people are doing, but we are expanding the number of those use cases that CloudStack can help orchestrate. Mm-hmm. And whether that be ensuring that we have really good support for some of those legacy types of use cases that are going to need high levels of redundancy and high levels of resiliency, or whether it's something completely new that you can use a container because you just need really fast access to the underlying hardware, but you don't need all the hardware. Sure. I think that's really the story. There are a lot of folks who talk about legacy workloads and cloud workloads, and that there are two. The reality is that there is a wide spectrum of workloads, and they start at the mainframe and they come down to cloud level, cloud era workloads, and we're trying to expand the dynamic range of CloudStack in the process.
Yeah, I mean, the reality in the IT industry is that everybody spends a lot of time talking about the new, right? A lot of fancy stuff. That's new. So most marketing discussions is around that. But when you look at where the real money is being spent, the real money is actually
non-sexy.
Is being spent in the non-sexy, eclipsing the investment that is happening on the edge, right?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that isn't where you want to be, but cloud orchestration software really should be in a position to help enterprises, or service providers help other enterprises solve that continuum of problems, right? And we see that every time we talk to another enterprise user, where they come to the table and say, here's what we want to help work on, or here's what we're going to work on. Even just accepting the reality that the hardware that is not orchestrated by CloudStack still needs to work well with the environments that are. Mm-hmm. And so we've, in 4.1, I think in 4.2, there's some minor features and tweaks that are occurring around how networking happens, so that you could effectively blend the networks together from maybe a bunch of AIX systems that are sitting next to a web farm, right? Maybe they want them on the same VLAN, or you want to be able to bridge things very easily. So, to David's point, that spectrum of what is really a heterogeneous environment will be a heterogeneous environment for decades to come. Portions of it can get a lot of benefit from thinking about deployment and orchestration in a similar way to what the far-end cloud workloads get.
Cool. I think that was a perfect wrap-up. So we're out of time for this week. So Chip, David, where can people find out more about you and CloudStack and everything that's going on?
Well, so naturally, CloudStack is at cloudstack.apache.org. We have a veritable plethora of mailing lists. You can also jump on IRC on Freenode. We're at #CloudStack. And welcome any interaction in IRC or email. As far as us personally, I am at KE4QQQ on Twitter. And you're Chip Childers on
at chip.childers.
Yeah, so we're relatively easy to find, and thanks for having us.
Absolutely, Thank you. So if you like the show, please tell a friend or leave us a review on iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter at thecloudcastnet or on the web at thecloudcast.net, where you can find links to everything Cloudcast. So Chip, David, thank you for your time, and thank you everyone for listening. Take care.